There's a lot of talk these days about what trauma is and is not, and the impact that it can have on our lives. You may be wondering, can trauma be stored in the body? And I'm going to answer that question for you in this video. My name is Tiffany Toombs. I'm a trauma-informed, high-performance mindset coach that has worked with thousands of people across the world to help them heal and release trauma, adverse experiences, and emotional baggage so that they can move forward with their future without having any ties that bind them to their past. Now, in this video, I'm going to share with you how and where the body stores unresolved negative emotions and trauma. And then I'm going to share with you the impact that storing that trauma can have physically, mentally, and spiritually. So let's get into it. So I want you to imagine that you have a trash can in your mind and all of your unresolved negative emotions get stored in that trash can. Now, for most of us human beings, that is every single negative emotion we've ever had, because very few people actually learn how to deal with their emotions when they are growing up. So let's say the first time that you felt anger, you were 2 years old and your mom took you to the toy store, wouldn't buy you the toy that you needed. What happened was you created an imprint of anger at 2 years old and you started filling up that bucket. Now, every time you have felt how that 2-year-old felt, you've added a link onto the chain and started filling the bucket up more. Now, that's just anger. Then we have fear. Maybe the first time you felt fear was 1. That's when you created the imprint, started adding to the bucket, and every time you felt how that 1-year-old felt, you've added a link to that chain. Then we have sadness. Maybe you first felt that at 3 years old. Same thing, you created the imprint. Every time you felt how that 3-year-old felt, you added to the chain and filled up the bucket even more. Then we have guilt and shame. We tend to feel these a little bit later in life, so maybe around 7 or 8, but it's the same thing. We create the imprint, and every time we feel how that 7 and 8-year-old felt, we add a link to the chain and fill up the bucket a little bit more. So there's a couple things that we need to know about this matrix of emotions. So firstly, the imprint, when each of these emotions is first created, part of our psyche, part of our mindset gets stuck at that age. And this is what people refer to when they're talking about inner children. Now, when that bucket gets full, there's a couple things that happen. Either we can get sick or injured, and I'll talk about that more in a moment, or in times of stress, we revert back to the age that we were when that imprint was first created. So road rage is not how an adult responds to sitting in traffic or being cut off. That's the 2-year-old throwing a temper tantrum for not getting what they wanted. So the more full our bucket is, and for most people their bucket is completely full to the point of overflowing, the more likely we are to be hijacked by these inner children, by our emotional baggage, and to lose control of how we respond in life. Now, we've talked about the horizontal pillars of this matrix, but what about the vertical ones? Well, each of the vertical pillars is related to a person. So anytime mom made us feel angry, fearful, sad, or guilty, that was stored in its own column. We would have one for dad, one for siblings, one for friends, teachers, bosses, ex-partners, bullies, anybody who's played a role in your life, you're going to have a gestalt for them. Now, we have this matrix, this scaffolding of negative emotion that's keeping us stuck. And our limiting beliefs, the things like I have to be perfect, I can't say no, money doesn't grow on trees, I have to work hard to make money, that's not possible for me, I'm not worthy. Whatever limiting beliefs that you have get stuck in this matrix. So if we truly want to discover what we're capable of in this life, we have to take this matrix down. I share how to do that in some of my other videos. I highly recommend that you check out the playlist on understanding and healing trauma. So before I share with you where specific traumas and emotions are stored within the body, I want to remind you to subscribe to my channel. I am putting out brand new content and videos just like this one every single week to help you understand how to break free from trauma, break out of the stress and burnout cycle and truly tap into what you're capable of doing in this life. So go ahead and click that subscribe button and like this video while you're there. What ends up happening is different areas of the body actually end up storing different emotions. So for example, your liver stores anger. Your kidneys store resentment and criticism. Your lower back tends to be associated with a lack of social support or feeling financial pressure and financial struggles. Your middle back tends to be linked to any guilt that you're carrying, kind of that get off my back feeling. So when you have pain or injury in specific areas of your body, it could be that you have a stored emotion in that spot that is not serving you. I've put a link to a blog post in the description where I list out all the different areas that emotions can get stored in and what emotions are associated with that area. So I recommend that you check that out. Now, before I share with you the impact of holding on and storing this trauma in the body, I want to hear from you. What emotions do you currently think that you're holding on to, and where in your body are you feeling pain? Go to the comments below and let me know, and then check out that blog post so that you can see what emotions are associated with those areas of pain, tightness, or injury. Now, storing trauma in the body has a very real impact on our life, and it honestly can impact every area of our life. It impacts how we respond to people. It impacts our personality traits. It can even impact the identities that we take on. In this video, look specifically at the mental and physical impacts so that you know how your trauma is impacting you. So mentally, we know that people who have experienced any form of trauma are more likely to suffer from mental health conditions such as depression, anxiety, bipolar, borderline personality disorder. Now, for a long time in the psychology and psychiatry fields, they looked at each of these disorders or these mental conditions as its own issue. And oftentimes this was linked back to a hormonal imbalance. Now, there are some people who do have hormonal imbalances that lead them to experiencing these mental conditions, but the majority of the population actually suffers from these conditions not because of hormonal imbalance, but because it is an adaptation to the experiences that they had, to the trauma that they faced. And so there is some discussion in the psychiatry world right now about changing how we treat each of these emotions. If you go to somebody who specializes in depression, then they're likely to find depression. But if you go to somebody who specializes in borderline personality disorder, they're more likely to find that. There was an interesting study done at Cambridge University, and what they found was that 89% of the people that had been diagnosed as borderline personality disorder at Cambridge University actually suffered from trauma in their childhood. When they started treating the trauma instead of the borderline personality disorder, that's when they started seeing dramatic shifts in their clientele. And I can tell you, even in the work that I do, I have had doctors take my clients off of antidepressants and anti-anxiety medications as a result of us working on healing the trauma. Of course, we never want to come off of any medications without doctor supervision, but sometimes that can be what happens naturally as a process of healing the trauma. So ultimately what we know is that depression, anxiety, and other mental health conditions can be a symptom of trauma, but not necessarily a condition in and of itself. Unhealed trauma can also lead to us taking on identities that are not really ours, or even personality traits. I've seen people take on identities and traits of being a perfectionist, being a people pleaser, being a victim, being a fighter, becoming ultra independent, and even more because of the trauma that they experienced. Now, this isn't who they truly are at their core, in their soul, but it's how they've felt that they've needed to show up in the world in order to avoid any further trauma, and ultimately just to survive. Mentally storing trauma can also lead us to be more likely to self-sabotage, to have high levels of stress, and to have intrusive thoughts that come in throughout the day to tell us that we're not worthy, that we're not good enough, or even in some cases to harm ourselves. So it is incredibly important to our mental health that we start to heal trauma. Now, physically, there's a whole nother slew of conditions that you might experience. Holding on and storing trauma in the body has been linked to everything from fibromyalgia to cancer to liver disease to arthritis and everything in between. So this can have a real long-lasting impact on our health if we do not face it. People with chronic pain that just came out of nowhere, oftentimes they also have unresolved trauma. And that's what that blog post in the description is for you as well. If you're having pain, look up what that pain is related to, and it might be that you have some trauma to release. Holding on to trauma can also lead to weight gain. I've worked with a number of people, specifically women, over the last couple years who've been doing everything right when it comes to their health and fitness. They eat totally clean, they're exercising 5 or 6 days of the week, and they're just not able to lose the weight. Because these unresolved emotions are so toxic to the body has to protect itself, and it does become toxic. When we release these emotions, there are times where people are physically ill. I've had a couple people vomit, and other people who have felt nauseous or gotten headaches and things, and that's because they're releasing these toxins into the bloodstream. Now, when we're not working on our trauma, when we're holding on to it, what happens is that the body will wrap it in a buffer. The best buffering system we have in our body is our fat cells. So our body will wrap these toxins in fat cells as a way of protecting us from getting cancer, from getting liver disease. So when you start exercising and you start eating right, your body then has to choose between letting go of these fat cells and releasing the toxins into the body, which can then cause other issues, or holding on to the fat cells and starting to break down your muscle to give you the energy that you need to do the exercise. So inevitably, all of these people who come to me who are stuck in their weight, as soon as we start healing the trauma, the weight disappears because we're releasing the toxins fully from their body, and their body says, oh, well, I don't need these fat cells anymore. We can just let them go. Now, if you're wondering just how much trauma you have, or if you were to give yourself a trauma score, what that would be, I've put together a trauma score based on the ACE test. This is a totally free test, and you can find it at mytraumascore.com or click on the link in the description. It's just 10 short questions, and it will tell you what your trauma score is. And I've included a little bit more information about how that trauma might impact your life in different ways. Thanks so much for watching.